Welcome back to another ranking video, and artists, you're free to start drawing now. And by all means, whatever you guys end up drawing during the length of this video, post on social media and tag me in it. My socials are in the description down below, and honestly, I just want to see what you guys are cooking up during these. And if you guys end up drawing any fan art, I would love to showcase it in a future video. With permission and proper credit, of course. I'm an art school graduate after all.
Bro's got a degree in film. LOL.
Yeah, it's a fact that gets more depressing the longer I think about it. Oh god. But today we are covering Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Did you already rank this show?
Yes, I did, and it's a video you can watch right here if you haven't seen it already. But if you remember correctly, I only ranked the first 5 seasons of that show because, well, that was the original run. You see, Are You Afraid of the Dark originally aired from 1992 to 1995, spanning 5 seasons in total before it was cancelled. And then in 1999, the show came back for just 2 more seasons, which are labeled as the revival seasons. Essentially, it's the same show, just with a different cast of kids for the Midnight Society. I mean, hell, these 2 seasons are even labeled as Season 6 and Season 7. But at the same time, I consider it a separate thing, and thus, I only ranked these first 5 seasons. A choice I think many of you agreed with me on. Right?
This video is a lie. Every means every. Won't you get roll with you convincing yourself you don't have to actually rank every episode. Every episode means every episode. This is shameless clickbait.
Yeah, okay. I'll defend my actions, but I'm a little more inclined to agree. But hey, that was then and now is now, and we finally get to check out those mysterious revival seasons. But this time around, we got a little CRT buddy over there. Ain't that right, buddy?
Fuck you. Don't even look at me.
He's just a little grumpy because he has a legally blonde VHS stuck in his VCR slot, but hey, there's worse things to get stuck in your VCR slot.
It's legally blonde. There really isn't.
You fucking take that back. Also, he doesn't have an official name yet, so I'm open to suggestions. Anyways, there's not too much of a pre-ramble this time around because, well, that's what the original Are You Afraid of the Dark ranking video is for. So, this time, I just want to briefly go over the new Midnight Society members and just this revival series in general. First up is Tucker. He is the de facto leader of the Midnight Society because he's stoic and strong-willed, but also because of nepotism. Yeah, Tucker is Gary's younger brother, and for those not in the know or don't remember, Gary was the leader of the Midnight Society in the original run. He also had the worst stories by far. What? You know it's true. You know I'm right. You can lie to yourself, but you can't lie to God. 2:30 in the morning when I'm recording this. And just like last recording, I really don't want to wake up the neighbors. But in this regard, Tucker's the essential torch passer and showing these new kids the way of the Midnight Society. It's just rather unfortunate that this time around, Tucker kind of lacks a personality beyond being the kind of voice of reason. Like, Gary was known to stir the pot from time to time, but Tucker, he just kind of sits on the sidelines. Next up is Quinn. He's essentially the troublemaker archetype that's not afraid to speak his mind. Legitimately, most of the episodes in Season 6 where Quinn tells a story, it starts with him coming to the campfire talking about how he got detention again for another time yet again. And Quinn's an interesting case because he's the only character that changes drastically in between seasons. Like in Season 7, he's just a lot more mellow. So, I don't know, maybe he finally got put on Adderall. And then there's Vange, the youngest of the group. She's essentially Quinn's partner in crime as they're both equally outspoken. I would say the key distinction between the two is that Vange can be a bit more immature in nature. And, I mean, she's 11 years old. It's par for the course. And then there's Andy, and oh man, does my heart break for Andy. He's essentially a gentle giant, a good-natured nice boy that gets picked on all the time from the likes of Quinn and Vange. Individually, but oftentimes tag team, full wombo combo, and no, that ain't Falco. But I say my heart breaks for this character not because of that, but because every time this dude has a story to tell, it's usually because something bad happened to him that very day. Like, oh man, I got rejected from this one club at school. Anyways, here's a scary story about it. If anything, it shows his resilience, because no matter what he goes through, he always manages to put a positive spin on it. A real glass half full kind of guy, and it's really nice to see. Then, last but not least, there's Megan. She's rich. Yeah, that's kinda her whole character. Yeah, like, she wants the Midnight Society to take place in her own backyard instead of in the middle of the woods. And she also has a cell phone, which everyone is shocked to see. I mean, it's the late 90s. Cell phones were a luxury, especially for a teenager. It's just funny to see how much times have changed. And I'll give Megan this. She's not over the top. She's kind of written in a way where she comes across as a very realistically rich, sheltered kid, and she does actually slowly change throughout the series. Don't get me wrong, at her core, she's still spoiled. I'm just saying that by the end, she ends up just a little bit more like the others. But with that out of the way, how is the Revival series as a whole? Well, if I'm being honest, I liked it more than the original run. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed my time with the first 5 seasons, but I feel like a majority of the episodes were kinda on the more dull and boring side. I think I even pointed this out in the original ranking, but the big detractor for me was the fact that the worst episodes were just really boring. Unlike, say, Goosebumps, where some of the worst episodes in that series were at least so bad that they were fun. And some may say I'm biased in that regard, but I really don't hold Goosebumps in any sort of allegiance whatsoever. But the Revival series I felt like had more Goosebumps energy. Things move a bit faster and it's a bit more scary. I also think it just being less episodes made it overall a lot tighter. Now, I know some of you may be asking how or where is this ranking going to factor into the original ranking, and, well, it's not. Kind of. I will be ranking the Revival series by itself, all 26 episodes. However, this series does have one 3-parter, which I'll be ranking as one entry. So really, there'll be 24 ranking spots. And then, at the very end of this video, I will display a graphic on screen and show where these 24 rankings would place in the original ranks. So that way there will be a true definitive rank. I figured that'd be the easiest way to do this rather than having some living ranking system that could possibly get a little confusing. Oh, and if you think that ranking the 3-parter as one entry is unfair for the other entries, I promise you it's not. And trust me, you'll see soon enough. So now that we're all prepped, I think it's finally time to finish this thing off. Submitted for the approval of the Midnight Society, this is every episode of the Revival series of Are You Afraid of the Dark ranked from worst to best. Listen, with an episode title that has Bigfoot in the name, one would almost expect the episode to involve Bigfoot in some way, shape, or form. And well, does it? Fuck no. Yeah, not a Sasquatch in sight. In fact, you'd have an easier time finding Bigfoot in real life than you would in this episode.
Just like how you have an easier time finding Bigfoot in real life than finding your dad.
Dude. But on a real note, that's a self-imposed expectation I set based off of a title. And while I'm disappointed that this episode has nothing to do with Bigfoot, it's not ranking dead last because of those unmet expectations. Instead, it ranks dead last because this episode sucks. Yeah, big surprise. The episode that ranked at the bottom is bad. Ooh. But before I get too into it, at its core, this episode does have a good emotional through line, as it centers around this girl dealing with the grief of having a friend go missing. And while everyone else has given up, she remains ever persistent that her friend is still out there and still alive, clearly as some sort of coping mechanism or rejection of reality. But her friend really still is out there, and old as hell now too. Some may see this as a bad thing, but I don't think you're seeing the bigger picture here. Because now she can order from the 55+ menu at IHOP. Or Denny's if you got a couple DUIs. But let me back it up just a little bit, because while the rest of the world has moved on, our main character remained ever so hopeful that her bestie is still out there. And this is intensified throughout the episode when she keeps seeing premonitions of said lost friend, which eventually lead our main character, and this guy, to a cabin in the middle of nowhere. They finally find their long lost best friend, but she's old now. Yeah, it turns out the visions our main character has been seeing was all one big trick by an evil ghost called the Umbra. Umbra basically projects illusions to lure people in and feed off of their life force. That's what happened to Homegirl over here, and that's what's going to happen to these two chuckle nuts now too, except the Umbra has one of the biggest weaknesses I have ever seen in any show. That weakness being light. And not sunlight like vampire rules, but just any source of light. Meaning you can kill this chick with a Game Boy Advance SP if you really wanted to. And this could, and by all means, kinda does work. I mean, the Umbra has deliberately cut the cabin's power line, ensuring none of the lights can come on. In fact, the only thing keeping this old coot alive over here is the fireplace. So it seems like the gang has to come up with some complex scheme to expose the Umbra, and oh no, they're just able to get the lights back on? Okay, sure. I mean, I am slightly underselling it for the sake of a joke, but still, I thought there'd be a more involved way of killing this ghost. But my other point of criticism is that the Umbra never takes on their original form. Instead, it just stays walking around in this girl's body, which is kind of lame and not all too imposing. I guess it's more of a psychological battle for our main character, having to fight the person you've been searching for the past month or so. So I get it in that regard, but for the climax, it would be cool to see the Umbra switch forms. You know, like in Zelda games. You beat Ganondorf, but oh shit, here comes his final form, Ganon. But as it stands, this episode had a lot of potential, and I can recognize that potential. I think it just needed to explore some of these elements on a deeper level, because as it is, it's kinda weak. Oh, and yeah, the girl returns back to normal. You're not really gonna see a lot of twist endings in this series. Every series I rank has at least one completely forgettable episode. An episode in which I look at my notes and go, wait, what the fuck is this? It's just the nature of binge watching a show. Although rare, this could even happen with episodes I actually quite like. But upon rereading my notes, this episode did come back to me, and I remember just why this episode is so forgettable. And that's because nothing really happens. I will say, this episode does have some immaculate vibes though. I mean, it takes place in a heavily wooded area, completely gray, overcast weather, it's a little wet outside, clearly late fall. You know, how the weather is right before your seasonal depression kicks in, but everything else in this story? It's more of an episode that's tailored to the type of kids who pretend to be warrior cats during recess. Or this guy specifically.
On all levels except physical, I am a wolf.
This is my soft way of saying this episode's more so for the closeted furries out there.
You mean like you? Yeah.
But that's what this episode really plays out like. I mean, a teen girl who doesn't know she's a wolf ends up being able to change into a wolf. I'm sorry, am I watching Are You Afraid of the Dark or a Twilight self-insert fanfic? And the road to these revelations aren't revealing much. I mean, we just got our main character being terrorized by this wolf, which isn't exactly real. It's more of a spiritual manifestation from within. But that's quite literally all there is to this episode. Well, I'm selling it a bit short again. Okay, so the only reason why this one isn't ranking dead last is because there is a pretty good message in this episode that is quite thought-provoking and unflinching in regards to its subject matter, especially for a kid's show. It's nothing particularly crazy, it's just a debate on the ethicalness of hunting animals for sport. But I gotta give props to the show for equally showcasing both sides of the argument. The show may walk away with a clear-cut answer, but I would argue it's given the viewers enough to think about and inform their own opinions. I just wish a little more happened throughout to really hold my attention. Okay, let me explain myself. I know this is a highly regarded and cherished episode within the Are You Afraid of the Dark community. And I know for certain a lot of you guys have personally displayed how much you love this episode. And the last thing I want is another Quicksilver situation on my hands. In my first Are You Afraid of the Dark ranking, I ranked the tail Quicksilver rather low on that list, and people weren't really afraid to call me out on that. It's why that video is the most controversial video on my channel.
Also because you just got a lot of information wrong and limited certain facts during certain episodes.
Yes. Thank you for reminding me, buddy. So, I have a lot of explaining to do, and all I ask is that you listen to me fully. And then you can leave a comment, call me a little bitch, or whatever. Sound like a fair trade? Okay, cool. So the Tale of the Silver Sight is a pretty notable episode because it is the series' first and only 3-parter, and is also the series' first and only episode that revolves entirely around the Midnight Society. Yeah, they're not telling a story, they are the story this time around, and that's badass. No joke, it's one of those ideas you kind of figure the show would eventually do sooner rather than later. And I guess they chose later because, well, it took 7 seasons. I mean, it's an obvious choice for an episode idea, right? Like, there's already a pre-established cast of characters, and it's finally a chance to better explore these characters that more or less act like bookends to every other episode. Now, it is a bit unfortunate that this premise only involves the new members of the Midnight Society and not the OG crew, because if we're being honest, I think more people had a better fondness for the cast of the original 5 seasons than these 2 seasons. You know, the OG Midnight Society is like that lifelong childhood friend. They've been with you through thick and thin and were even your best man at your wedding. While the new crew is like a drinking buddy you knew in college. Y'all used to get plastered at bars back in the day, but outside of that, you've hardly kept in touch. Maybe y'all awkwardly exchange memes every other month, you know? However, for a little bit of fan service, Gary's back for this episode, and it's really cool to see. He basically reclaims the role of leader from his younger brother Tucker, and really spearheads the entire mission. It's hard to say he's actually changed all too much from the original series. Outside of being in college now, it's the same old Gary, taking everything as serious as he did back in the day. However, there's no sight of Sam. Oh, yeah, some of you might be lost here. Basically, at the end of the original series, Gary and this other girl named Sam started dating. These two having a mutual crush on each other was a plot point that was kind of hinted at here and there, and in the final episode, these two finally made it official. In the grand scheme of things, it was ultimately pointless, I guess, but it was really cute to see actually unfold. And now she's nowhere to be seen. Yeah, don't get me wrong, despite having 3 parts, these episodes have a lot of story to tell, and trying to work Sam into these episodes would maybe make everything a little too messy. Still, I think just a quick line saying how the two broke up, or how she's out of town, or how she fucking died, or just anything, would have been greatly appreciative. But I think this episode's strongest attribute is its interconnectedness between one another. You see, beyond being a 3-parter, this episode is actually split up into segments, as essentially these characters have to find and collect all 5 plot MacGuffins to unlock the Master Sword. I don't know. But in order to accomplish this, the gang split up and search all over. Some are paired up, while others just go solo. And in the beginning, it's rather basic as far as presentation goes. Typical switching back and forth between the A plot and the B plot. You know, these two are doing this thing over here, and then this one person is doing this thing over here. But what I love is when they show another storyline early, removed from context, as a means to make you wonder what's about to happen in the next episode.
What the fuck does any of that mean?
Let me give an example real quick. In the first episode, we follow Tucker and Gary as they explore this general's house. And I'll talk more about this in a minute. But at the very end, all of a sudden Quinn comes bursting into the house and steals a pencil drawing of some girl. Like, what the hell is that all about? Well, in the next episode, we follow Quinn as he explores a junkyard. And the owner of said junkyard just so happens to have the thing he's been looking for. But he says he won't give it to Quinn unless he's able to get an old pencil drawing he made of some woman back in the day that he kinda had a relationship with. Eventually, Quinn pieces it together that the general stole this drawing and he was able to steal it back. And all of a sudden, this scene makes a lot of sense now that we have context. This happens at the end of every episode, except for the final one of course, as it means to tease the next episode, but also build up intrigue, and it's really cool to see. It also happens about halfway through every episode, as every kid ends up converging in Gary's dorm room, which, god damn, what school is Gary enrolled in? That's a pretty good room for a dorm room. I mean, no roommates, plenty of space, and yet, no bitches. Poor, sad, typical Gary. And for my last point of praise, I think it's cool how this episode explores the lore and the origin of the Midnight Society. In concept and not so much execution. Yeah, if I'm being real, it's not executed the best. A lot of Midnight Society lore is kind of bogged down by the Silver Sight shenanigans, which I'm not the biggest fan of. I want to know more about why the Midnight Society formed in the first place, how it persisted all these years, and what the fuck is in that magical dust. Instead, the episode is more keen on showcasing why the original Midnight Society broke up, and you'll never guess it, but it's because of that damn Silver Sight. I know what a lot of you are probably thinking right now. Colin, why are you actually reviewing the episode? Don't you know you're just supposed to sit there and recap the entire episode beat for beat? That way I get the sense of watching the entire series without having to actually watch the entire series? Come on, that's how it's done. And to that I say, damn, you're a really self-aware person. And have it your way. Okay, so from the top of the episode, we find out that Tucker and Gary's grandfather, who is one of the original founding members of the Midnight Society, passes away under mysterious circumstances and leaves the boys with a letter that essentially acts as an RPG fetch quest. You know, find the 5 magical MacGuffins, or in this case, 5 pieces of a broken record. You see, the original Midnight Society got a certain charm called the Silver Sight, which is basically just a stone that, if fallen into the wrong hands, could mean the end of the world. So they hid it from the world, and Gramps hid the information of his exact location on this record that's now split into 5 pieces. As I stated before, the gang split up to find the remaining pieces. Tucker and Gary end up meeting one of the original members of the Midnight Society called the General, who acts rather suspicious. Quinn ends up in the junkyard, as I previously mentioned, and Megan ends up in the sewers with this bizarre family that just lives down there. And then Andy and Vange explore an amusement park. But woven throughout all these different plots is this old-timey ghost orphan-looking kid. He actually just kind of warns these kids and aids them in their search, but he's still a little suspicious. But the kids manage to find all the pieces and head off to retrieve the Silver Sight in this badass walk sequence. I know there has to be some kid back in the day who thought this walking sequence was like the coolest shit in the world. Anyways, before I get into the finale, I just gotta say, this whole fetch quest stuff is why this ranks so low for me. I mean, it's not all too interesting. Things are tame, nothing ever gets out of hand, and really, the mystery component just isn't strong enough to be carried for all 3 parts. You see, truly, if this was greatly condensed down into a 2-part special, this could have been pretty good, and if not good, at least considerably better, because as it is, the pacing just drags. Also, these kids have some really fun chemistry with one another. I mean, we literally see this chemistry on full display at the start and end of every single episode, so why split them up? I know there's some in pairs, like Andy and Vange or Tucker and Gary, but I think the episode would benefit greatly if the group just stuck together. That way their witty banter and the way they bounce off of one another would more or less make up for a less than stellar adventure. But the true saving grace is the final showdown. You see, the Ghost Kid has been testing these kids to see if they're worthy of possessing this Silver Sight. But the General comes in and says the Ghost Kid is actually a demon and wants the Silver Sight for himself. And in a truly shocking twist of events, the General was telling the truth. Yeah, for some reason, I just kind of believed the kid and distrusted the General character.
So if you were in their shoes, we would all just die.
I mean, when you put it that way, I seem even dumber. Anyways, the kids use the Silver Sight to kill the demon, and oh my god, why is this death so brutal? It's legitimately terrifying. But this is where it finally hit me, and that is that this shit is happening for real. You know, it's not a campfire scary story. These kids that have always existed within the real world are seeing a ghost demon thing disintegrate via a magic stone. Like, they just completely jumped the shark here. Kinda. You see, in the end, it's revealed that this entire story was told by the original Midnight Society, which is just a complete cop-out. A cute cop-out, but a cop-out nonetheless. It's an ending that wants to have its cake and eat it too. It also just doesn't make sense. Like, okay, so young Gramps is making up a story about his future grandkids somehow, but also, the original Midnight Society takes place in the 1930s, yet there's a very pivotal moment in the plot where Andy and Vange are using a computer in Gary's dorm to locate the last record piece. So, yeah. I know these are just nitpicks, but to that I say, either commit and have paranormal magical shit happen in real life to these characters, or don't. It's as simple as that.
How long is this one? Fucking right?
In my defense, I'm talking about 3 episodes at once here, but I'll wrap it up. Hopefully those who love this episode can maybe at least understand where I am coming from. You don't have to agree, I just need you to see it through my perspective. And hopefully I don't piss too many people off in the comments with this one. Just remember, everything here is subjective. This episode by far is the most cartoony episode in this entire series, and if there's any doubt, meet Mr. Pym and Mr. Collins.
We relish discovering new places on our own.
Yes, we just gobble it up.
I think there are Looney Tunes shorts less exaggerated than these two. And by all means, this really shouldn't be a point of contention. I'm cool with whatever tone an episode decides to set as long as it's consistent. And by all means, this episode stays cartoony the entire time, even in this horrifying dream sequence where there are people hanging from meat hooks in a freezer. It's still zany. In fact, this kind of tone contrasted with the more horrific visuals make the sequence even scarier. But that's the only standout portion in this story. Instead, I feel as if it gets in the way of moments that by all means should be thrilling or suspenseful, and it kinda ruins the mystery component. Like, the basic gist is that Tweedledee and Tweedledum move in next door, and very quickly our 2 main characters suspect that they are cannibals. I mean, all they do throughout the day is cook, and the kids notice that a couple people who visited them never left. So the boys start investigating. Whether it's eavesdropping on the conversations right outside their window, or sneaking into the apartment when they're out. These are, or rather, should be suspenseful scenes. I should absolutely be on the edge of my seats, but I'm not. And you want to take a guess as to why?
All you have horrible attention span.
Dude, come on.
Don't worry, man. I can help you out.
I, 37, male, was 7 years old when tragedy struck my life due to my parents. Now they are back to ruin my life again.
It's because the cartoonish nature completely eclipses anything else. It basically negates any sense of suspense whatsoever. And it breaks my heart, because the episode proved it can balance the cartoonishness with the horror rather well via this dream sequence. But that's the only time in this episode where it works. That being said, what we do get is kind of fun, but it could be a little bit more. Oh, yeah, and these 2 aren't even cannibals. In the end, they explain away any and all evidence as contrived misunderstandings. Except at the very, very end, where it's hinted at how they might actually be cannibals. Which is a moot point. I didn't really need these guys to be actual cannibals for the story to work for me. In fact, having these guys just be regular old guys is a little bit more of an interesting ending to me. Like, an episode where all the horror was actually self-imposed because our main characters misread certain situations is a pretty fun idea for these types of shows. So the ending is a little weak in that regard. But by far the bigger problem here is that it's a little too silly for its own good, and because of that, it misses out on some good thrills. This episode isn't really breaking any new ground. In fact, you guys have probably already seen this episode. Whether it's any of the Phantom of the Opera movies or even the plays, hell, Goosebumps had Phantom of the Auditorium in both book and television format. Because that's what this episode is all about. It's basically Are You Afraid of the Dark's spin on Phantom of the Opera. Just sub out the piano with a violin and you got this episode. And that's not me trying to undersell this episode. What it does well, it does pretty well. I'm just saying, it's a tale as old as time at this point. Our main character plays the violin in this horribly rundown school that's set to be torn down soon. Meanwhile, this mysterious cloaked figure who hides out in the walls of the school takes a liking towards our main character because he likes the music. While at the same time, he messes with anyone who even slightly picks on her. But, like, it's not malicious. It's more annoying shit than anything, like getting covered in red paint. Yeah, that's a pain in the ass, but it's not like deadly or even that gross. I mean, just look at my girl Carrie covered in pig's blood. Although she did get the last laugh. Or ceiling tile falling down, not on these kids, but near these kids. Like, okay. But eventually our main character meets up with this mysterious character in the sewers. And since the school apparently is getting torn down tomorrow, he asks for one last violin session. Our main character agrees, but on one condition. She gets to see his face. And it turns out, the dude is actually pretty handsome. Like, outside of his weird mutated hands, he's kind of just a normal guy. At the same time, I get it completely. I have horrible self-esteem issues too. But after she plays her violin, the two share one last dance together and that's all she wrote. Yeah, a rather basic episode here. And I think the biggest problem is there's no stakes. Our Phantom isn't really a threat and has no intentions of really harming anyone, which is fine, and the episode could actually make this work if they built up the mystery component a little bit more and make that the focal point of the episode. So in short, there's no real sense of danger, and it's a story you've probably seen already. That being said, the ending is so sweet and sincere, I couldn't help but to smile. This one's not bad, and to give credit, it does have a twist about halfway through the episode that I kinda didn't see coming, but it does effectively act as the turning point for the episode. You see, the biggest hindrance is the first half. It's not bad per se, it's just really slow. It's all telling and no showing. Granted, I understand there's quite a lot of things this episode has to properly set up, but I think it could have been done in a more succinct way. So this story takes place on stage, but unlike other episodes, this isn't a high school theater production. This is a local community theater that just so happened to have an ensemble of teenagers in the cast. For Macbeth. Yeah, it makes me wonder why they'd even go down the community theater route if they weren't gonna fully capitalize on the setting. Like, a community theater production is so great because you can have some snotty 16-year-old acting alongside a mother of 3 in her 40s, and somehow their chemistry on stage is absolutely unmatched. But yeah, our main character's whole reason for acting in the play in the first place is to get some pussy. Usually men in theater are gunning for the opposite thing, but that is neither here nor there. But very quickly, this older lady tells the main character that this theater hasn't done a production of Macbeth in over 30 years, since during the last production, the actor playing the lead role passed away halfway through the live show. So, tormented by never finishing the show and the new production starting up, the ghost of the man is back and is ready to wreak havoc. And the typical thing occurs where our main character sees all the paranormal happenings and can't get others to believe him, which leads to a bit of a falling out between him and his crush. And listen, you watch as many children horror shows as me, and these kind of plot beats just kind of become white noise at a certain point. But our main character tries to locate the old lady from the start when it turns out that she was actually a ghost too. Yeah, she was the girlfriend of the man who died on stage. With all this information, our main character pieces everything together. And it turns out this ghost isn't trying to harm anyone. He's not trying to sabotage or halt the production from happening. He simply wants to finish what he started. So in a great final scene, the two act out, well, the final scene. And our ghost dude reunites with his long-lost lover, and they are both finally able to move on. And it's really sweet. So while the last third of this episode is great, those first 2/3 are either a bit on the slower side or very standard as far as children horror episodes go. You know what I'm saying? It's like getting a triple dipper from Chili's and 2 out of the 3 things you ordered just suck. You wouldn't say that was a good meal, you would just say that the mozzarella sticks were good. In the same way that I would say that really only the ending is good. It's not like everything beforehand is terrible, it's just alright, I guess. This episode is dumb. This episode is beyond silly, and it is nothing but fun. It's a type of episode that you can recognize as bad and should maybe place a little bit lower, but you have so much fun with it, you can't help but to cheat the numbers just a little bit. But that being said, everything's pretty straightforward. As this episode revolves around these two teenage girls as they fight off a bunch of robot clones of themselves in a game of laser tag, made by this corporate alien guy who's disguised as a human.
What the fuck was so straightforward about that?
Yeah, okay, maybe when I summarized it, it doesn't sound so straightforward, but I promise it's easier to follow than one would think. But really, this episode is fueled by these two girls and their intense competitive relationship with Taekwondo, which a talent agent scout takes note of and invites the pair out to a new game. The new game being laser tag, which has actually been around since the 1970s, and it was invented by the US military? What the fuck? Anyways, at least it's a new style of laser tag, as this time around there's no guns, and instead the lasers shoot from these glasses. So where you look is where you aim, and I gotta give the show massive props. I thought it was near impossible to make the game of laser tag look any stupider than it already does, but by God, they found a way. But this girl loses and just disintegrates. But it's chill because she reemerges moments later, but she's acting a little bit more robotic. Maybe because she's a robot now. Moments later, we find out the truth. You see, this talent scout is an alien, and on his planet, laser tag is really popular. Or should I say, laser maze? Because that's what they call it in this episode. Like what? Is laser tag trademarked or something? It can't be. Right?
Actually, it is.
Huh. I bet you didn't expect to learn this much laser tag lore when you clicked on this video, but here you are. Anyways, laser maze is a very popular sport on his planet, and after seeing how competitive these two are, he decided to make robot clones of them to ship off back to his home planet to rake in the ratings. Only problem being, the robots kinda suck ass and easily lose. Eventually, our main character convinces this guy to let the real deals compete in laser maze, and upon releasing them, they just kick his ass. I mean, the dude must have failed kidnapping 101. I mean, he knows that these chicks can kick some ass, but I guess he was too busy thinking about all the money he would be making off the merch rights alone from these girls. But yeah, this episode is dumb, it's fun, and it's not winning any awards, but it's pretty entertaining. I just wish the actual laser tag aspect of this episode wasn't so stiff when it came to the choreography. But I guess one could argue that adds to the charm, and to that I say, fair enough. We got a love story on our hands over here, centered around some average dude and a self-proclaimed artist, when in reality, she's just some photographer.
Bitch, you got a film degree.
I know, and that's debatably even worse. And I'm not really discrediting the field by any means, I'm just saying it's funny how times have changed. Because in 1999, yeah, being a photographer was a big deal, but in 2025, dude, everyone's an amateur photographer, whether they're deserving of the title or not. I mean, taking a picture of your Waffle House order after a night out with the girls doesn't make you a hashtag photographer, Amanda. But I just find it kind of funny, because a big point of contention for this episode is that the boyfriend's parents don't exactly approve of our main character because of the fact that she's a photographer. And our main character through the episode loves to say how that nobody gets her because she's an artist, a tortured soul, and whatnot. And yeah, if you ever end up in an art school, it's definitely an archetype of kid there. However, I will say that these parents don't just disapprove of our main character, they are downright disgusted by our main character. And like, For what? Some out of focus photos of birds in the park? Maybe it's just because their son goes missing and they don't know how to articulate their emotions well. The plot. Yeah, so these two have a little argument and the boyfriend ends up finding this statue with flowing water and decides to take a drink and, well, this dude's just a straight up statue now. He kinda had it coming. But our main character ends up finding her now stone boyfriend along with this dude who calls himself the Protector. Like, okay dude. The episode even makes fun of this.
My name is Julie, and this is the... What's your real name?
I never tell.
Now, you may be asking yourself, Colin, there's a lot of emphasis on this character being a photographer. Is it ever plot relevant though? Well, no, not really. Technically, a photo she develops leads our main character back into the woods where she finds both her boyfriend and the Protector, but outside of that initial call to adventure, her being a photographer is kinda irrelevant. If anything, they should have made her be like really into ceramics or something. But anyways, they eventually end up finding the original sculptor of the Stone Maiden, who, in a nice twist, is actually very pleasant. Yeah, usually in these types of shows, the creators of something evil or just kinda end up being evil themselves. I mean, the doll maker from Haunting Hour, or the inventor of the camera from Goosebumps, and I'm sure the list can go on and on. But that may have to do with the fact that the sculpture wasn't made with malice. In fact, when our main character tells the sculptor about the Stone Maiden, she doesn't understand what's going on because she never put a water fixture into that sculpture. And also, there's supposed to be two of them. You see, the whole piece was about a boyfriend and girlfriend, and it turns out that the city separated the two with plans on moving the boyfriend sculpture to somewhere far away. Luckily, they are able to intercept this transportation and return the statue back to its rightful place that undoes the effects. Well, kinda. It's cliched, but a kiss returns the boyfriend back to normal, with finally the parents now accepting our main character, which, like, nah, these parents can kick rocks. But this episode to me is just really solid. A really nice average episode. If anything, this is kind of the baseline for the series. Doesn't do anything good, but doesn't really do anything bad. The only detractor for me is that her being a photographer doesn't really factor into the story at all. Like, yeah, it kicks everything off, but I think it also should have saved the day as well. You know, it would make sense. These parents don't approve of her because she's a photographer, but then she wins them over by saving the day because she is a photographer. I think that would have bumped this up a couple spots at the very least. I expected this episode to be complete garbage, and by all means, on paper, it really should be. Check it. It's the late 90s and virtual pets, namely Tamagotchis, were all the craze. So taking a pop culture fad like that would not only horribly date an episode, but could also possibly highlight how out of touch these writers truly are. But in the end, it's just an average episode. Almost disappointingly so. I kinda wanted that horribly dated, out of touch episode I hypothesized about. In a weird way, being average ended up being worse than just being bad. Of course, this opinion isn't reflected in the rankings because I realize just how stupid I sound.
You criticize bad episodes and let the badness show makes a bad episode.
Listen, I already said I know I sound stupid. I will say though, even if it's just an average episode, it kind of has a nuanced take on technology. At the start, it looks like the story is shaping up to have a classic technology bad kind of message, as our main character has never touched a computer before in her life, and is just very opposed to technology in general, which I was kind of willing to give this episode a pass because it's the late 90s after all, and home computers and just the notion of the internet in general were all so new at the time. But in the end, our main character comes to understand and appreciate modern technology. So the overall message is less technology bad and more so that technology is good in moderation. It may seem scary at first, but it's really convenient and worth learning. You know what, man? I appreciate you.
Don't make me barf.
But I think the most shocking aspect of this episode is the whole virtual pets angle because, yeah, these aren't really virtual pets. That is to say, outside the appearance somewhat resembling Tamagotchi, they're nothing alike. You don't gotta feed these guys, clean up after them, or even play with them. It almost makes me wonder what the curiosity in the first place is. I mean, it's just a scary looking CGI dog. Okay. It lobotomizes the kids. Gotcha. Nah, but these pets, called diggers, which just remind me of Mega Man Legends, ends up kidnapping and swapping places with these children. So while these kids are stuck in these devices, these diggers walk around in similar looking bodies, acting like complete zombies trying to give other kids virtual pets. To what end? I don't know. They seem pretty keen with collecting knowledge and eradicating humans, which is good enough for me, I guess. One thing leads to another, and now our main character has to shut everything down. The only problem? She has to use a computer, and oh boy. It's like trying to get your grandma to open Gmail via FaceTime. It is pretty aggravating, to say the least. But eventually, our main character just overloads the computer and saves the day. Just a really solid episode altogether. And despite not being as dated as I would kind of like it to be, funnily enough, it's still dated. I mean, I miss those days of big clunky computers. So I think if any of you 90s kids are watching this video, you'd get the biggest kick out of this episode the most. That's a cute title, but this episode is another classic children's horror archetype that I haven't mentioned before. You see, I've already talked about Be Careful What You Wish For episodes to death at this point. It usually involves the main character making wishes that go completely awry, a classic monkey's paw situation. In fact, every ranking I've done so far, I think to some extent has had at least one of these episodes. But this time around, this episode isn't exactly a Be Careful What You Wish For episode, as it's more of a Be Grateful What You Have episode. As our main character wishes for a better life, but upon receiving what he's always wanted, does he learn that his old life already was the better life to begin with. And if that's not scary enough, you got a samurai chasing him around the entire episode too, which is such a non-threat. Not only is it just sporadic when this guy appears, but our main character kind of just blows him off. He's never given the proper weight to feel threatening. But luckily, this new life was terrifying enough that this really wasn't needed, even if the samurai just ended up being a symbolic gesture to his darker half. Cute metaphor, but not scary. So what life does our main character live that he wants to desperately get away from? Well, he's a teenage boy stuck working in his family's restaurants, while his real passion in life is art, or more specifically comic books, and he wants to someday attend an art school to further his education.
Colin went to an art school. Look how he ended up.
Yeah, it's not glamorous. But I get it, his dad's kinda strict and he spends all day in this restaurant that really isn't popping off or anything like that. But his attitude is kinda on the bad side.
I'm not wasting my life here like my parents or my grandfather.
And going to an art school isn't wasting your life. At least your grandpa has something to show for it in the restaurant. But his grandpa gives him a box that he tells him not to open. And then moments later he opens it, and it's filled with golden fortune cookies that transport him into his ideal world. In this universe, he's not just a comic book artist, but the best-selling comic book artist. On the downside, he's no longer related to his family. His parents don't know him, and his sister doesn't recognize him. In fact, because of his absence, his sister kind of falls down a bad path in life, and maybe kind of owes a lot of dangerous people a lot of money, or whatever. Oh, and the grandpa is just dead in this universe. But once he defeats his darker half, everything goes back to normal, and our main character has a newfound appreciation for his life and his family. Don't get it twisted, it's a very average episode yet again, but I can't lie. It's a really warm ending that just makes me smile. Okay, so after losing his daughter, Dr. Herbert West starts experimenting with his serum that he... wait a second. Yeah, I got the wrong reanimator on the brain. I just gotta change my thought process real quick. That's much better. Anyways, The Tale of the Reanimator has all the correct tools in place to be a great episode, but unfortunately doesn't fully capitalize on it. In fact, there's a lot of similarities between this episode and Goosebumps' Stay Out of the Basement. At the same time, it's very much its own thing. You see, this episode revolves around our main character who works at a flower shop, and the owner of said flower shop creates a blue serum that can completely revive dead plants. This starts as a fun concept for an episode, but slowly the tone becomes a bit more grim when our main character starts to connect some dots. You see, the store owner's wife passed away 1 year prior, which just so happens to be the time frame in which he began inventing this blue serum. So the working theory is that this guy, consumed by his grief, is trying to resurrect his dead wife. And that's pretty dark, especially for a kid's show. But this whole story just builds up on this tension as we descend down this dark rabbit hole until it just kind of stops. Yeah, the tension and tone kind of dissipate once these kids visit the graveyard and accidentally spill Fortnite juice all over the ground, forcing them to deal with this zombie character for the rest of the episode, which could have worked, but it's more silly in nature than anything else, and the makeup is kind of lacking. I know this is a kid's show, but at the same time, this is the same series that gave us the gruesome character design from the Dead Man's Float episode. I just feel like the zombie makeup could have been a bit more grisly. Also, plants don't really factor into this episode a whole lot, even though in the first act it seems like they're going to be a big deal. But the zombie is eventually defeated by heat, as hot water undoes the effects, so they just trap the zombie in this hot room and he fucking disintegrates. I feel like what we got in the first half was just significantly better than what we got in the second half. And that's not to say that the second half is bad, it's just alright in the end of the day. But it feels like they were setting up the whole episode to be just a little bit more. This episode is pretty solid. Just a simple, nice above average episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark? Truthfully, I don't have too much to say about it. The episode presents itself as a bit of a mystery, but the type of mystery where it's painfully obvious to see where it's going. So much so, it kind of just unfolds like a normal episode. But that's okay in the end of the day, because this episode revolves around these two boys trying to make it into this club, which is essentially a frat. But like, a really lame frat at that. It's a private boarding school. What are these kids gonna do? Rush a library? But their final task to be accepted in this club is to pull a prank, and our main character just steals a painting from the head office, which actually ends up revealing a photo of a house underneath it. And one by one, people start getting sucked into this house because of this ghost kid living in the photo with his trusty camera. Eventually, this older professor spills the beans. The kid in the photo was a kid who never made the club and died trying to get in. Meanwhile, the house in the photo turns out to be the old clubhouse. And so our main character just decides to locate the house in real life, confronts the ghost, defeats him, and saves the day. And I am kind of rushing through this one, but giving credit where credit is due, it's a fun final act. Once entering the house, everything turns black and white, like the photograph. Better yet, the main character is able to get the ghost kid to take a photo of himself by strategically placing the painting up to the camera, which is reflective outside in the windows. It's a really cool effect and really cool idea. Once again, I apologize. It is harder for me to talk about episodes that are just average or above average. There's usually not much there in terms of discussion, and Lord knows this video is long enough. And it definitely doesn't need any sort of padding, so just know it's a pretty solid episode. I think I have a massive soft spot for this episode because, well, look. This whole episode takes place on a gray, wet, overcast day. From start to finish, there's a nice layer of fog throughout this whole adventure, and the majority of this episode takes place in a rundown diner or this rusty, crusty junkyard. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, it reminds me a lot of Silent Hill. I fucking love that game. I swear to God, every January, February, I get a craving for a good survival horror. As soon as this video is done, I'm just gonna play Silent Hill. Probably just the first one. Maybe 3. Maybe 4. 4 slept on. I need to stop talking about this. The aesthetics of this episode are unmatched, and the actual story itself is pretty solid. It's an episode I wouldn't write home about, but I also wouldn't mind putting this one on again. I think the episode's biggest strength is the chemistry between these characters. Our two main characters share a relationship that is pretty standard, but executed rather well. You know the type. You got your more uptight, stricter, straight man character, and you got the more aloof, rabble-rouser who just cares about having a fun time. But the antagonists in this episode are great too, mainly because they don't act like your typical antagonists. Yeah, they're a bit of the scheming type, but realistically they just want to move on finally, cause yeah, they're ghosts. Okay, let me set this up properly. After getting a car from a junkyard and completely overhauling it, these two end up taking a joyride in which they end up in this endless loop, stuck between this old diner and Highway 13. Oh yeah, and there's this giant truck trying to constantly run them off the road. So there's a very real threat present for this episode, which is pretty nice. Basically, these ghost boys explain that years ago they ended up racing this giant truck, and the giant truck ran them off the road, killing them both, but also the truck driver. They claim if they didn't chicken out and just went a little bit faster, they could have been in the truck and would be alive today. So the only way for our main characters to make it out of this endless loop is to beat the truck in a race. So our impulsive character leaves his more uptight counterpart behind, because he feels like he would interfere with what has to be done. But upon racing this truck, he gets a bad feeling and decides to stop altogether. Turns out, their deaths weren't the trucker's fault. It was actually these two numbskulls all along. They were just going too fast and lost control. And because of our main character's final actions, these two finally accept the fact that everything was their fault and they were able to move on. And so does the car. It just disappears. Like, it would be such a sweet ending if these kids didn't blow so much cash repairing this car. But no, it's a very touching ending, and I'm glad they gave the more impulsive character the ability to actually slow down and think things through. It shows actual growth. I mean, it's the obvious message of the episode, but it shows a lot of growth. But with that, we're officially entering the part of the ranking where episodes are no longer really considered bad. Instead, the other episodes that rank higher are just considered better. So I know this was just out of reach of my top 10, but I would still highly recommend checking it out. Zombie Dice is a fun one, and for anyone with 3D printers or just really good craft making skills, if any of you guys can make these dice for me, hit me up. I think it'd be a lot of fun to cover this space in a bunch of knickknacks with shows or movies I talk about on this channel.
Yeah, like you need more pointless shit luxury of this space.
I mean, hey man, I'm not gonna give you the reaction that you want. Instead, I'm gonna dig deep, and I'm gonna say, I love you.
Say that shit again and I will barf for you.
But I think this episode works so well for 3 reasons. One, I think this episode just has a great atmosphere. A majority of this episode takes place in this pseudo bar / arcade area. It's a soda bar. It's kind of like a teen center, which I have never actually seen in real life. So much so that when I was a kid, I thought places like these were just made up for television. I mean, hell, part of me still thinks that. But 2, this episode just has a great mystery. I mean, the cold open alone will get you hooked. And finally, 3, the biggest attribute to this episode, hands down, has to be Mr. Click. I mean, dude, that smile still scares the shit out of me, even now as a 24-year-old.
Aren't you 25 now?
Well, if this video comes out before the 12th, I'll still be 24, but after the 12th, I'll be 25.
Goddamn, you were old.
Yeah, but really only in internet years. But the gist of this episode is that Mr. Click bets with these kids on a game of zombie dice. The stakes? If the kids win, they get free shit from the establishment for a full year. But if they lose, Mr. Click just wants a thumbprint. A mysterious request that, by all means, should raise some red flags. I mean, to give credit, the main character even points this out himself. And yeah, that's because technically he wants more than just a thumbprint, because after using the device, Mr. Click shrinks them down and sells these kids to buyers across the world as pets. And this is just human trafficking. Holy shit, this is just human trafficking! Oh no. but it's a fact that our main character doesn't find out until the end when he finds out his friend has been shrunk down. So in order to save the day, he decides to play Mr. Click in his own game, that being Zombie Dice, which I should actually explain the rules real quick. Okay, so Zombie Dice is pretty easy. Basically, there are these pair of dice that each are completely blank except for one side that has a skull. And the object of the game is to roll both dice 3 times in a row and never get a single skull once. Because if you get just one skull, you lose. Mr. Click usually makes the kids play this game because it's easier for them to fail than it is for him to win, which is why our main character flips the script and makes Mr. Click play the game, which doesn't go as planned and he actually ends up winning. But this makes our main character go double or nothing and offers up his little brother. But this time, he gets to choose the challenge, and I love this ending. You see, our main character challenges Mr. Click to a drinking game. The rules are simple. The main character has to drink 3 big cups of soda, while Mr. Click has to drink 1 small cup of soda. However, the rules state that the main character gets to drink 1 cup of soda, and Mr. Click can't start drinking his soda until the main character's first cup is empty and placed back down on the table. Oh, and Mr. Click can't touch any cups but his own. So once our main character drinks his soda, he places the cup upside down over Mr. Click's soda. And because he can't touch any of the cups but his own, he is unable to even drink from his own cup. It's a guarantee win for our main character, and it's just really clever. I mean, this kid's gonna be a legend in college. But everyone returns to normal and Mr. Click gets a taste of his own medicine. I really wish this episode could crack the top 10, but I think that speaks volumes to the level of quality we have left in this series. This episode is a fun one that can easily keep my attention throughout the entire episode. But maybe that's because of all the primary colors. Please don't remind me. I gotta sit here and think about what I want to do for the next 3 hours and then never end up doing anything. But this episode ends up being a little sneaky. You see, the plot kicks off, and at first, it seems like this episode is going to revolve around some random computer game. And honestly, I was ready for it. I mean, scary Unreal Tournament, scary Quake, scary, I don't know, Pajama Sam. I mean, at this point, I just sound like I'm pitching bad video game creepypastas. But nah, this episode actually has very little to do with the game. Instead, it's more of a surreal, disturbing, court case procedural. You see, this rich kid ends up accidentally stealing this game from the store once his dad cuts him off financially. Then, him and his friend, that he just met at said store, decide to enter a contest for the game, and once going to the designated area, are quickly thrown on trial for stealing said game. It's like if Nintendo caught you pirating their games. But they have the right to a lawyer, a clown lawyer, who is really just there for vibes. And you know what? I can respect it. But the poor kid ends up taking the fall if it means the rich kid can walk free. A pretty noble sacrifice. So what is he sentenced to again?
Executed!
What?
So it's really like if Nintendo caught you pirating their games. Luckily, the rich kid has a change of heart and goes back to save his newfound friend, since his limo driver pointed out that this has been the only friend that likes him for everything else but his money. So after taking the wisdom glass hostage, they make it out alive. But in a rare moment, Are You Afraid of the Dark actually utilizes a twist ending. Turns out the limo driver was in on this all along, and it's safe to assume that these boys are dead. I just love an episode with such a fun visual style. Truly, from start to finish, there's always something pleasing for the eyes. I guess if there was any problems with this episode, it's that it takes a while for the actual plot to kick in. I know that there's a lot of setup to this, but it could have been a little tighter. There's usually at least one of these kind of episodes in these children horror series acting as a metaphor for steroids or performance-enhancing substances. And usually, they're pretty good, and this episode is no exception. Of course, they just can't be shooting up on their thighs, so instead of a needle, it's a fucking hockey stick. Oh, yeah, this episode's sport of choice is hockey. Are You Afraid of the Dark is a Canadian production after all. This series is just one box of Timbits away from singing the Canadian national anthem after all. But this one kid will do anything to make the hockey team, and that just so happens to include talking to a snake man and accepting a hockey stick from him. I mean, I've accepted worse from people who've looked better. So, par for the course, the hockey stick makes him significantly better, but it also makes him a complete dickhead, and he lashes out at our main character. Oh, yeah, and he ends up breaking out in a terrible rash that gets worse and worse and more scaly. It's pretty evident he's turning into a snake, and honestly, it's a great sense of body horror. This series, the revival and the original run, didn't really do a whole lot of body horror, so it's a great thing to witness. Eventually, our main character tracks down Jake the Snake, and Jake shows off his cool PS1 FMV snake pits, and then is promptly defeated, with everything going back to normal, but there's a slight hint that maybe Jake lives on. It's a fantastic episode with great pacing and even better body horror, but you know, if we're being real, the climax is a little weak. CGI snakes aside, this final confrontation is lacking a little bit of impact, but other than that, it's a good time. This episode hits on something so profound and so real that not a lot of shows revolving around kids do so properly. But I almost guarantee all of you that you can relate to this episode on some level, because I think when we were all middle schoolers, we went through something similar, and that's being cringe as fuck. Yeah, I think we all had at least one cringy phase that we can collectively look back on when we're older and go, fuck. Emo phase, weeb phase, or your sweaty phase of trying to play Melee competitively. And you never even made bracket. I bet you just want to forget that part of your life. But this episode revolves around this kid who is currently in his vampire phase. And I mean the full enchilada. The dude is obsessed with vampires, he dresses like a vampire, and for the plot of the episode, he drags his family to spend a night in this town that has a high report of vampiric activity. Meanwhile, his dad, while begrudgingly supportive, just wants to go to a New York Jets game.
You sure you want to go to this place? I mean, I got field seats for the Jets game tomorrow.
Honey, this is Adder's call.
Which is so funny because the Jets suck ass. Like, Aaron Rodgers is washed up at this point. And listen, I know they just got Aaron Glenn as the new head coach, who has done wonders in Detroit. But the fact of the matter is, they need a lot of rebuilding to get this team back on track.
Dude, nobody in your target audience is gonna understand what you were saying.
I mean, yeah. But in a funny turn of events, the residents of this town accidentally mistake our main character for a vampire and start hunting him down. And while desperate to survive, our main character accidentally wakes up a real vampire deep underground. So essentially, this dude's got humans who want him dead and a vampire who wants him dead. It's one giant chaotic misunderstanding that persists throughout the entire episode, and it's fantastic. Everything that could go wrong does go wrong. And at the very end, in the final seconds, the main character proves that he's not a vampire and exposes the actual vampire for the vampire that he really is by exposing his ass to sunlight. This rightfully makes our main character get over the whole vampire phase, which, like, yeah, if a bunch of crazed MCR fans tried to kill me, I would have to denounce my emo ways. But in a rare twist ending move, the innkeeper is revealed to be an actual vampire, which could be seen coming from a mile away. In fact, I was a little surprised they saved this reveal for the ending, because to me, it was so obvious, I thought it was going to be like the mid-episode twist. But whatever, it's a cute ending for a pretty great episode. This episode is like a classic campfire ghost story, which I know sounds kind of dumb because the whole series is a bunch of kids sitting around a campfire telling ghost stories. And I know a lot of you guys pointed this out in my first ranking video of Are You Afraid of the Dark whenever I describe something as an emotional ghost story, and like, you ain't wrong. But this is done really well. The sense of progression in terms of revelations is immaculate, and the tone stays ever consistent. It's all you could ever ask for with a story like this. I mean, it's even got a little bit of romance. But the story revolves around our main character who keeps getting anonymous love notes that get creepier and creepier as the episode goes on. Meanwhile, anyone else that's vaguely romantically interested in our main character starts getting threatening notes to back off. This all comes to a head when the mom finally reveals the dark past to her daughter. Turns out when she was in high school, there's this guy who wanted to date her, but she kept rejecting him. Eventually, this led to a confrontation in the woodshop room that ended up with him kind of exploding to death. And I guess all these years later, the ghost is haunting the mom's daughter because these two happen to share the same nickname. Or maybe the ghost just likes him young. But this eventually leads to a confrontation in the said wood room with the ghost. And instead of talking some sense into the ghost, or giving him some sort of peace so he can finally move on, they just kind of fucking blow his ass up again. Yeah, once for the physical form and once more for the spectral form. I absolutely love this ending. It's just so funny to me. This episode is one that only works because the central character is written so pitch perfectly. That is to say, he's just a straight up dumbass. More a himbo than anything else. I mean, the premise is about a teen trying to stop an alien invasion and he's just completely aloof the entire time. I mean, it's less of a surprise in terms of a twist ending when it's revealed that instead of helping stop an alien invasion, he's been helping start one. Then again, this kind of behavior should be expected from the same guy who puts jelly on top of the fridge instead of in it. And somehow that's worse than starting an alien invasion to me. I mean, here's the thing. At the start, this new girl moves into town, and for a brief second, her real identity is kept a mystery before it's just dropped completely. She's an alien, and she recruits our main character to help her ward off these lunar locusts set to destroy Earth. The whole thing is kept on the down low, which initially makes our main character's girlfriend suspicious that he's cheating. But nah, he's not cheating, he's just accidentally destroying the world. Because in the end, that's exactly what happens. Really, just the characterization of our leading role, the witty banter, and the fact that the good guys just straight up lose in the end makes this episode really stand out in the best way possible. So, if anyone here is a fan of the Haunting Hour series, first off, check out my ranking if you haven't already. But second off, this episode has striking similarities between the Scary Mary two-parter episode from Haunting Hour. So much so that at certain points, I was almost shocked. I mean, they both have an old lady that steals faces from young girls and keeps said faces stored away, so she can wear whoever she wants. But also, those said girls have no face, and must wear a mask with a blank expression. But also, these girls are dehumanized and their names can't even be used. The only key difference between the two is that the Scary Mary episode has to deal with a bunch of Bloody Mary stuff, along with a bunch of Mirror World bullshit. And as far as which one I think is better, it's the Tale of the Many Faces. I mean, for starters, it's just a tighter script. It's just one episode long and doesn't have to deal with any of the Mirror World shenanigans, which can be cool at times, but for me, just muddied the plot. But because of this, the Are You Afraid of the Dark episode can just focus on the existential identity horror this episode is filled with. Also, the makeup in this episode completely sells this horror. But it's a pretty standard plot, as our main character gets scouted by Madame Visage, who takes her under her wing and promises all these great things in terms of acting and modeling and yeah, she just steals her face. But it's not until our main character's friend pulls up that she works up enough courage to stage a takeover and put Madame Visage's old wrinkly face back on her, which prompts her to fucking rot at the speed of light in front of everybody, and goddamn. Starting to realize that a lot of the higher ranking episodes have a good amount of body horror to them. I gotta cut that. My back was tensing up, hence the wiggle. Starting to see that a lot of high ranking episodes usually have a good amount of body horror to them. But this episode is truly fantastic, and if you're a fan of the Haunting Hour episode, I couldn't recommend this one enough. So, Oblivion is a 2006 role-playing game for... wait. My bad, guys. I did it again. I was talking about the wrong thing with a similar title.
This wasn't funny the first time you did this bit.
I'm not gonna let him get to me. In fact, watch this. Hey. I love you.
When I warned you, now I'm actually gonna barf. Lark, that's what...
Hey! I knew we could get that out eventually. But this episode is notable because it's the grand return of Mr. Sardo. Or rather, as I should say, it's just Sardo. No Mr. and accent on the dough. But man, did I miss this character. He was in a couple shitty episodes back in the previous series, but he was always the highlight in those episodes. And the writers definitely didn't miss a beat with his character on this revival series. He's right back to his old tactics of selling kids super magical shit that he doesn't even know how it works, and then paying the ultimate price for later on. And what I love most about all this is that it all just makes sense. You see, Sardo was Gary's original character, and even with Gary out of the picture, Tucker, the one telling the story, utilizes his characters. And I'm just gonna rip this band-aid off real quick. Unfortunately, we don't get the other reoccurring character being Dr. Vink. Yeah, sadly enough, it does make sense. Tucker is Gary's brother, so Sardo lives on, but Frank was the creator of Dr. Vink. And Frank's no longer here, and no one else here is related to Frank, so no more Dr. Vink. It's a real tragedy, but if I'm being honest, Sardo was always the better of the two, so... Anyways, so in typical fashion, Sardo sells our main character a pencil and eraser set, except this set is busted as all hell. Basically, if you write or draw an object and then erase it, said object will just disappear off the face of the earth. And I guess it's gotta be proximity based, because if I draw and erase an apple, then shouldn't all the apples in the universe cease to exist? But this episode explores the fun applications of this concept before our main character gets a little annoyed with his sister and just erases her out of existence. Realizing the grave mistake he just made, he erases himself to go in after her, and he ends up in the Oblivion. And I mean, what the hell? He erases Sardo too just to throw him into the mix, and let's be honest, he had it coming. So once they're there, they run into this barbarian-looking guy who has been there for a while and desperately wants the pencil and eraser set and chases the kids down. And these kids can't exactly erase this guy because when they do, he just comes right back. So now they gotta figure out a way to return home, all while hiding away from this bloodthirsty brute. Now, for a second there, I thought this was going to get really conceptual. Like, they can't escape the Oblivion, right? So why not just bring the entire universe into the Oblivion? You know, write down the universe and erase it. I mean, that's kind of sick. But unfortunately, the actual solution is kind of lame. They just erase the door to the main character's bedroom, and somehow that is good enough to get them back into the real world? It's just kind of a cop-out, to be honest. But a less than stellar ending can't really affect the overall amount of fun that is to be had with either this concept, which this episode takes full advantage of, or the marvelous character of Sardo. And honestly, I just wish we saw more of this guy throughout the revival. I didn't mean to plan it out like this, but the second and last appearance of Sardo just so happens to follow up with his first appearance in the revival episodes in terms of this ranking. That's right, Sardo ranks back to back, and I wouldn't have it any other way. In fact, the only reason why this episode ranks above the last episode is because There's more Sardo in this one. And you can never have too much Sardo. Probably. Maybe. I just miss the guy. And I'm glad he's back. But this episode is a classic tried and true be careful what you wish for episode, as Sardo sells our main character a chest box that contains a genie that is hell-bent on making our protagonist's life a living hell. And I'll give the episode some credit. Instead of our main character making wishes that horribly backfire or go awry in some way, a lot of this episode actually just has the genie character making wishes for our main character completely unprompted in order to appease him, without him ever directly saying something. I mean, he does make a wish here and there, but for a majority of the episode, it's just the genie kind of making the wishes on their own volition to get on his good side, which is such a simple shakeup of the formula, but one that is ever so refreshing to see. Like, the genie sees him losing at dodgeball, so without making a wish, she just makes him really good at dodgeball. Except this backfires when he accidentally hits the teacher. But the best part by far is when they start throwing Sardo into the mix, and it's just hilarious.
Let's not panic.
Attention! You in the house! Come on out or we're gonna fire tear gas!
Okay, let's panic.
Yeah, I misspoke. You can never have enough Sardo. Sardo adds so much to the back half of this episode. He's such a great reactionary character, so having him in an environment where wishes are happening left and right gives him a lot of opportunity to flex his comedic chops. In the end though, our main character just wishes that it was yesterday, and he stops himself from ever buying the chest off of Sardo in the first place. A neat little bow on a truly fantastic episode. I saw that this episode was mentioned a lot in the original Are You Afraid of the Dark video, so I knew it had its fans. That being said, whenever I do these rankings, I try not to buy into the hype and just review each episode on my own merits. However, I did have to brace myself just in case this episode was bad. I mean, I already slagged off the Silverside episode. I don't think I'd be alive tomorrow if I didn't give this one a high ranking. But luckily, I have the pleasure of reporting back that this episode is amazing. I mean, clearly, it ranked number 2.
You know some people are still gonna be mad that this is a number 1.
Oh, I know, but that's just the nature of the internet. But this episode works so well because the threat of the nurse character is very real. She has this unnerving, persistent quality to her character, and if anyone has a phobia of needles, good luck watching this episode, because she's always got that thing on her. And this all concludes in a very sweet and charming way, as it turns out that the inciting incident was all one big misunderstanding. I'm being intentionally vague in regards to this episode because I truly think that everyone should watch this one on their own accord. I think this is a ranking series first, because the first episode of the Revival series just so happens to be the best.
In your opinion.
Motherfucker, everything's been my opinion. But I love this episode so much because it's just such a unique concept for an episode. Basically, our main character is stuck in this tree and has to beat this kid in a board game. A board game that directly affects the outside world, and therefore affects these kids' siblings who are stuck in an endless loop. Whether it be summoning lightning, this beast monster thing, or instantly changing daytime to nighttime, truly this board game knows no bounds, and each space is as dangerous for the outside world as the last. But the stakes are rather simple. Beat the kid in the board game and our main character gets to leave, along with his brother and sister. But if he loses, he basically trades places with this kid. It's a fantastic game through and through, and in my opinion, it's the best this Revival series has to offer. It's non-stop fun, it's got some great horror elements, some superb set pieces, fantastic tension and suspense, and in the end, there's a truly heartwarming conclusion. Really? This episode just has everything one would want out of an Are You Afraid of the Dark episode. Sorry to be intentionally vague and short on this one again, but truly, this one is worth checking out, and I don't want to spoil too much. So you may be asking though, how did the Revival episodes rank amongst the original episodes? Well, let's consult the chart. So any episode in green is going to be the revival episodes, and any episode in purple is going to be the original series. And it's an interesting spread. As you can see, I think the overall revival series had the better consistency within regards to good episodes. But the original series still had the best episodes overall, but they also had the worst episodes overall. So funny how that works out. But now I can officially say I am done ranking Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes, and honestly, it feels like a giant weight off my chest.